Hello, everybody. This is Gregory with 5 Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today, we're going to talk to a regular lay Catholic by the name of Nicholas, and we're going to discuss his background as a Catholic and what where in the spectrum of Catholicism he fits, even though we honestly shouldn't have a spectrum. It should just be you're a practicing Catholic or you're not. And then we're going to touch upon his interactions with Protestants and talk a little about church politics, in particular, the far right of Catholicism. By all means, call in if you have a question. If you want to ask either of us a question, if you have a question about apologetics or whatever, or your opinion, we'd like to hear from you. So let me bring on Nicholas here. Nicholas, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So where do you live?
I am in Boise.
Boise. Okay. Yeah. I had a live stream with a gentleman who used to live in Coeur d'Alene, and he was telling me that there's a lot of that there's a traditional community up there. What about Boise?
Boise, not so much. So we do have the ability to go to a Latin Mass about once a month, but mostly it's just Novus Ordo here, which is a little bit sad for me. But yes.
So you have no Latin Mass. That's
we
permanent?
have one once a month. I have to go about half an hour to be able to get to attend to it. But other than that, there's not really anything. There's no FSP within driving distance.
So why does Coeur d'Alene have all the trad communities? But Boise is much bigger and is the capital and doesn't have any.
I have no idea, because I mean we're right now maybe it has to do with we're kind of the seat of the diocese right here where I'm at. So maybe it has to do. They have so many parishes around here that maybe I don't know what they decide.
There's a bishop of Boise, or are you guys under the bishop Archbishopric of Denver, or how does that
work? It's not an archdiocese, so it's just a regular diocese. So we have a bishop
of Boise.
Boise, yeah.
You have a big Mormon community there in southern Idaho as well.
All over Idaho, actually. So it's I think a lot of it is kind of the overflow from Salt Lake comes up, especially on the east side too.
Yeah, they have BYU in one of the cities over in eastern Idaho. They have a BYU.
Yeah, out in Rexburg, they do.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so how would you characterize your childhood in terms of your faith?
Well, it was pretty agnostic, I would say, as far as I guess my parental instruction in terms of faith. So both my parents were raised Catholic, and they just kind of did what a lot of people do when they become adults, and they just, haven't had good catechesis when they're young. Is they just kind of like, oh, well, I'm just gonna, not do it anymore. And so I was raised kind of in that atmosphere where I was free to do what I wanted to do or believe what I wanted to believe. And I guess I was kind of blessed from a young age to kind of have that search, I guess, that longing to figure out, what I wanted to believe. And I kind of started out in the Protestant world because I had friends, who went to like churches and stuff who were Protestants. I was raised in Oregon. And took a few years. I went to a bunch of different Protestant churches, a bunch of different faiths. I went to the Mormon church.
Let's back it up here. So when you were a child, did you get all your sacraments, and did your parents take you to Mass weekly?
No. So I did not. I never attended Mass with my parents. So that was something that I decided to do on my own. And I had some distant relatives who were Catholic, so like cousins and aunts and uncles and stuff. So I am actually an RCIA convert, so I received all that through RCIA.
Wow! So your parents were nominal Catholics, but never went to Mass, and I'm assuming you were baptized as a child.
I wasn't baptized as a child.
Wasn't even baptized. Wow.
Nope. Yeah.
Do your parents currently practice, or they?
No, they don't go to church at all. It's one of the many arguments sometimes we have that I'm praying for them to
we talk about how Europe is mission territory now, when it used to be, essentially the capital of Christendom. and we have so much mission territory in our own lives with our family and friends, and it's unfortunate. So you were essentially not raised Catholic, and then when you got
Yes.
to your mature years, then you started looking around at different Protestant faiths. And what denominations did you go to?
I was actually fairly young, so I went to a non-denominational Protestant church. I went to a Baptist church, Presbyterian church, just kind of all around,
Let's
whatever
jump
was
in.
local. Yeah, and just kind of just learning more. I didn't really see much difference in terms of theology in between the two.
Shocking.
I didn't really get So and then I kind of bounced around to different, a little bit more
Okay, let's back
extreme.
it up. So why were you bouncing around? Because I have an episode here, like why Protestants church jump. And like I sarcastically say, and I shouldn't be sarcastic, how theology is not the number one thing as to why they're bouncing around. They're not like, well, I need to go to the most theologically accurate church. Why were you bouncing around to different churches?
For me, I was still fairly young, and I guess I was still searching for that feeling of
Mhm.
what was right and welcoming. And a lot of them were welcoming. I just thought, I don't know, I guess I've always been kind of traditional in that a lot of them I felt were a little bit too charismatic in terms of their worship, and I really didn't it didn't feel right to me at the time. And I'm too young at this point to really have an understanding of like theological concepts, or you know
How old
why
were you at
a
this time?
church. I was preteen at this time, so I
Okay,
was
preteen. Okay.
very, very young.
Okay.
um, and I
So
but I still.
what about in your college years and in your 20s? What kind of churches were you going to at that point?
So I was already Catholic at that time. So
Okay.
I was a very young RCIA convert. Um,
And what
and
brought you back to the faith?
well, I got married young. I was in the army, and I kind of left the church just through like laziness and who I was married to, and it was a whole situation. But um, I realized as that was breaking up, and I had a lot of family issues that happened, that you know I was unhappy where I was and in the state I was in life, and I needed to come back. I felt like God was calling me back into church. Um, for
And
me, it was.
why did you feel that exactly? What was the calling per se? Because like Protestants will always, a lot of what the Protestants feels very emotion based. How did you know that it was a legitimate calling?
For me, I mean, yes, there is that aspect of it, that feeling that a lot of Protestants talk about, with the Holy Spirit and everything. I feel like that was part of it. I was also in a state in my life to where I was never unhappy out of church. So like when I was married, I was married to someone who was very anti-Catholic, and that caused a lot of conflict in my life, and I never felt happy being away. And there were a lot of situations that happened in my life, uh, close family members that were kind of trying to bring me back, and stuff happened with that I really felt like I needed to come back and live my faith more fully,
So
as opposed.
when you were married, you were still at that point. Had you converted, or were you still Protestant
Yeah,
church?
so I converted when I was a teenager, when I was a very young teenager, actually.
And then you
Um,
met this woman, and she was a vehement anti-Catholic. But at the point,
so
you were young and in love, and didn't see that that was a major problem that was going to
yeah,
lead to.
so it was actually kind of weird. It was because she was raised Catholic, so and in my estimation, that she was still kind of there, and it was an interesting situation. And then when we actually got together, she was like, "Oh no, I'm not," So, um, that was a surprise to me, but I was already, pretty invested in that relationship at that time, and so I was just like, "Oh well, okay,
And when
I'll
you
just do
got
whatever."
married, well, did you get married in the church, or was it a civil?
No, it was a civil marriage. Um, so I'm actually kind of thankful for that now, just because of the annulment
Melanoma.
aspect. I'm still able to, in, someday in the future, get married if that is.
What was her main argument with the church?
Um, well, I think she just wanted to live in the world and not, be restricted
Be
to.
her own pope.
Yeah, pretty much. Just not be restricted to what she felt were just a bunch of rules that the church says you can't do, instead of things you can do. And I just wasn't foundationally strong enough to be able to argue those positions at that time.
Sure. Okay, then you guys separated, and then how old are you now?
I am 36 now.
Okay, so you've been Catholic for the last 20 years or so?
Yeah, give or take, minus the time that I left and came back, and I've been pretty strong, and hopefully just every day just keep on growing in my faith and
That's what you have to
knowledge too.
do. Yeah, persevere till the end. So it's when you were in Oregon, and I'm assuming when you were in Idaho, you were just going to Novus Ordo masses. You were not exposed to the kind of the more traditional.
Yeah, so I wasn't exposed to traditional masses at all. I had been warned, I guess, about sedevacantism, and so I didn't really understand that there was like a non-sedevacantist traditionalist type movement at all in the church. It was just Novus Ordo for me.
And did you find it like where you did your RCIA and then later in your 20s? Did you find, I don't know if you've seen the episodes on liturgical abuses that drive me crazy. I think it's like a 5-part series, but did you, were you not keen like I was on the pop music and the banners and the hand holding and introduce
Yes.
yourself before mass and all that?
So I saw a lot of things, and I was lucky that I had some mentors who were very conservative and traditional in the way they approached their faith. And so I learned a lot of things very early on, and kind of developed the things that I saw that I didn't like. I've always been a little bit more conservative, in terms of like the charismatic aspect of living out your faith, and then seeing people come in with like rock bands or whatever to do a mass, and I'm just like, I don't feel like that's right. So I saw a lot of that in Novus Ordo. I also saw a more conservative aspect of the liturgy, to where I could see, okay, this I feel is much more I guess
Solemn.
solemn. I'm trying to think of the word that's escaping me right now, but and then when I saw all all those charismatic aspects, I was just like, that doesn't seem right, to me. So I had an intuition, I guess, in terms of what I felt was right and not, without even having that kind of foundational, theological
Just
background.
intuitively, you knew there was something errant
Yeah.
about the Novus Ordo Mass, and it's not really necessarily the Novus Ordo Mass per se. I mean, we can talk about
Yeah, and I
including the
have
conspiracies, but just like how you just didn't find those masses to be solemn.
yeah, and I felt there was something wrong in those, and when I came across it, I was just like, I would talk to people like, hey, why is this okay, or why do you think this is okay? And so yeah, it was interesting without even having that foundational knowledge background. I had issues with it.
And so, at what point did you start going to Latin Mass, or what point did you
Yeah,
start
so I started courting someone that I met, and she was FSSP, and I had never heard of them, and so I was like really, really hesitant. I was like, I want to make sure you're not a sedevacantist, so can you tell me more about this? And so she introduced me to the Latin Mass, and I went there, and it was really awkward the first time, and
Oh, I know. Yeah,
they gave
it's
me.
a strange transition, no doubt.
Yeah, I definitely had questions. I was like, hey, why is the priest facing the other way, and and all this
Why
stuff?
are we speaking every 5 seconds? It seems to be really silent. Why aren't we doing all these prayers out loud?
Yeah, but during that period of time, I really fell in love with it, and it if I could go to it every week, I would. It's just where I'm at, that limits me in terms of that.
Now, was this in Oregon where you were going to the Latin Mass, or were you living
This
somewhere
was
else?
in Colorado, actually. I was in Colorado Springs.
Okay, so yeah, does Colorado Springs, Denver area, do they have some FSSP or some Latin Mass options?
Yeah, so I believe it's Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, I think. I can't remember the name of the parish, but yeah, there is an FSSP parish in Colorado Springs. It's a very small community, but definitely very welcoming too. If anyone is ever in the area of Colorado Springs, definitely go there.
So over in Boise, you said it's about a half-hour drive to a Latin Mass?
Yeah, they have one Latin Mass. It's still Novus Ordo, but they have one that's celebrated in Latin a month.
And
So
when
we
you
do have
don't
that.
go to that one, how would you describe the parish that you go to in Boise?
It's a Novus Ordo. For me, it's just convenience, closest parish that's also fairly welcoming. There are aspects that I don't enjoy about it, but also I realize I have only so many options where I'm at to
Well, I mean, look, to be fair, half hour is not too bad of a drive. There are people that drive
yeah
several hours to
yeah I just wish they offered it more. is my
once
biggest
a
thing
month.
is yeah.
I've reached out to the FSSP. I live in San Antonio, Texas, and in San Antonio, we have a large Catholic community because it's a big Hispanic city. We're an archdiocese, but in terms of a Latin Mass, we have an SSPX chapel, and we have a Novus Ordo parish that has one Latin Mass on Sundays at noon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. We don't have. I go to an ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter, which is kind of like an Anglican liturgy, but they're Catholic priests. And so, like I said, it has the kind of the trappings of the TLM, but it's in English. But that's all I really have. In our town is 1.3 million. And so I've reached out to the FSSP, and I'm like, can you maybe come here, because Austin has a Latin Mass, Dallas area certainly does. Taylor Marshall goes to a Latin Mass over there. Houston, where I grew up, has 2 or 3 options. And it's like I'm in the same situation, so I can go my friend. I did a live stream with a gentleman by the name of Stephen. He goes to that Latin Mass that's at noon at that Novus Ordo parish. But my problem with that is, like, if I see all the trappings of Novus Ordo, the bad architecture, the lack of statuary, and all these things, but then I'm in a Latin liturgy, I just find it to be discordant, and it throws me off. Or if I go to the SSPX, and I've gone to the SSPX Latin Mass here in town, it's very small, but at least it feels like everything lines up. The architecture lines up with the ancient liturgy. And that's just my issue. And those are my 2 choices. So I'm kind of in your situation, but honestly worse, because you only have one once a month.
Yeah, well, hopefully my situation's about to change. I'm hoping to move across the country, so I'm hoping there will be more options there.
If you can pick a town, definitely, like Stephen, my friend, he's like, I'm going to move to Houston because they have an FSSP church there that just only does Latin Masses. So
yeah,
that's kind of jives with your work situation, and certainly move to a town that has that, so you get that spiritual nurturance.
Yeah, I'm actually in the research phase right now, but I'll be around Philadelphia, so
Okay.
somewhere around that area. I don't know what they have
you like that weather? You gonna like that area?
Well, it was the better of the 2 options. The other option was Arizona, and I just can't stand the heat. So
I went there. Speaking of courtship, I was courting a woman that lived in Arizona, and she was going to an FSSP parish in Phoenix. I went to go visit her, and it was my first time in Southern Arizona. I'm like, I don't know how this city exists. I don't know why there'd be 2 million people that would want to live in the desert where there's no verdant color. It's all zero escape, no rain, and 120 degrees. But Northern Arizona is different. I could live up there, but I agree. I'd rather live in Eastern Pennsylvania for sure than Southern Arizona.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you're a Catholic. You try to go to church all the time. You try to be in a state of grace. So you mentioned to me that you do have some interaction with Protestants. Your parents. Do you try to get them to go to church, or is it just a topic?
So my parents, my mom especially, she leans more conservative these days as she gets older, and sometimes she is able to hear my arguments, and she'll attend with me if I'm there. I mean, we live in different states now, but if I'm home and I ask her to attend, she'll attend with me. My
What's her
dad,
argument for not going to church at all?
for her, it's a similar thing to my ex. Was it's just, living in the world and not really adhering to any sort of
But
faith
she wouldn't say that.
faith
That
belief.
requires too much introspection and honesty to be like, I'm too much in this world. 'Cause James and First John talk about those who love this world hate God. So I don't think they're going to be like, I love this world, therefore I hate God. So what is their excuse? Like, I have a friend who's like, oh, my daughter's in dance recitals, all teenage dance. She's in teenage dance. So all day Saturday we're traveling for dance stuff, and so Sunday morning I need time to relax. That's her excuse for not going to
Yeah,
church.
so a lot of the arguments.
What would your mom say? Is, hey,
Oh,
mom, why don't you go to church on Sunday morning?
I think the biggest thing is, why do I need to go to church to have a relationship with God? I think it's the argument a lot of people will say when I ask them to
The
come to
lazy
church.
argument.
Yeah,
That's
that
the
it's
lazy
like,
argument, right? And
yeah,
the way I retort to that is like, well, Christ gives you so much you can't give an hour back, and we are. She was raised Catholic, so by canon law, she's still under canon law, and we're expected to attend mass and to receive the graces that come from that, and not to mention the Ten Commandments of remembering that.
yes. My biggest argument there is, well, just think about the statement in the garden from Christ is yeah, you could not spend 1 hour with me. It's just an hour a week. That's all. That's it. So um,
That's why
but
I
yeah.
think COVID and watching mass online did a lot of disservice. I remember I was interviewed on the Catholic Current TV show with Father McTeague. He has a radio show, and he was quoting a stat once that post COVID, 6% of identifying Catholics are going back to mass. And during COVID, it was just a lot of people are like, oh, I can just eat my pancakes and watch mass on Sunday morning.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And closing the churches for a variety of reasons was, I think, a humongous mistake. But I think it kind of leads to that. Well, Jesus will forgive me if I don't go to church. Church is not important. I'm spiritual but religious. I'll just read the Bible, or maybe say a quick prayer, and that's all.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's just that lazy argument again. It's just in a different form, I think. Than
What about your dad?
My dad, he's not. I don't know. I don't have much contact with him. We didn't grow up together, so a lot of times I find it uncomfortable just to even broach the topic with him, just because we
I
haven't,
understand.
you know.
What about
Uh,
siblings? Do you have any siblings?
I do, and I have a lot of siblings actually, and none of them were raised in the church. So a lot of them are just kind of, you know, living their life, I guess, the best way they can, but they also, aren't Christian or aren't religious in any way. And
Are
I
these
think a lot of
biological siblings, or are these like half siblings?
so I have a lot of half and some step siblings as well. Some of them, through a variety of different situations, just never really attended, and for some reason I was kind of just had that urge, to kind of find the truth, and I don't know what it is about me that made me do that, but um, I assume it's the grace of God that kind of pushed me to do that. But
How
with
often do
them,
you
it's
interact with your siblings?
a lot. We all live in different places though, so sometimes it's hard. But when I go home, and we're all together for a funeral or reunion or whatever. Then we'll all go and spend time together. But none of them are Catholic, so that is
I mean,
awesome.
it's a great moment of evangelization. I think on one level, we are surrounded by fallen away family members, because Christ wants us to testify to them about the beauty of the faith, and that is one of the works of mercy, is to do that. So definitely, I think there's that criteria to admonish the sinner and so forth, and are you the best person to present it? But my argument is always, you present at least one time to these people. Like, you should not fornicate or not be a drunkard, go to mass. And if they don't want to hear it, don't burn that bridge. but essentially shake the dust off the sandals and move on, because you've done your Christian duty to evangelize, and whether or not they want to hear it is ultimately on them, not on you. But what is on you is evangelizing, because we are called to do that at least one time.
Yeah, I think I take the approach to meet them where they are, since they don't have, either that base belief system that, such and such is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong.
Yeah,
But
but
so I'll
it's
talk to
natural
them
law.
about, yeah,
Natural
so,
law teaches us what's really wrong or right. Like, we don't need to know what the church is teaching on murder to know that murder is wrong.
oh yeah, with the big, yeah, especially that, yeah. I think they all have that general opinion, of course, that those natural law aspects are wrong. But in terms of I guess general morality or church teaching or just belief in Christ in general, they don't have that background. Very atheistic liver.
Well, I like the libertarian part. I don't like the atheistic part.
Well, I'm fairly new to Idaho. I didn't grow up here, so it's there is definitely, I think, a very strong Protestant culture, but it's also, yeah, very libertarian, and I kind of swing that way as well myself. It's probably why I like it so much here, in terms of
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
the
I
libertarianism.
my issue with the Libertarian Party is that much of it wants to legalize prostitution and drugs, and I don't feel like society in general, government in general, should condone vices. And this is one of the reasons why I was against abortion being legal. Is prostitution. I can understand the argument for legalizing it, and recreational drugs, but again, I don't believe it's society's. I don't believe it's government's. It's the best interest of people for government to support a vice. And so I would be totally fine with prohibition, because prohibition of alcohol, because drunkenness is a grave sin, and alcoholism has destroyed America on so many levels we just don't really talk about anymore. And people would say, well, there'll just be bootlegging and illegal stuff like in the 20s. I'm like, well, that's fine. But there's something to be said about government supporting a vice. And that's why I don't support the Libertarian Party per se. I would probably more be allegiant to the Constitutional Party. I've never voted for the Republican Party ever, because I just feel they're just a slower road to socialism. But I've supported the Constitutionalist Party. But let's go to another topic here, because I do want to talk about, because we are going to talk about, like I talk about with all four of my guests here, mad, rad, trad, where do you fit in on sedevacanism and stuff. But I do want to talk about your interaction with Protestants, because you had mentioned that you have a friend who's a Protestant pastor.
Yeah, so we have conversations. Usually it's regarding one aspect. Like most recently, it was on the sacrament of reconciliation and why it was necessary.
Well, let's back it up. So
First,
you say he's a pastor. So did he go to Fulton Theological Seminary, or is he just
I
get like
have no
this
idea where he got
seminary
his.
degree from the back of Rolling Stone, and now
Um,
he calls himself a pastor?
I have no idea. I know he did go to school for it, though, specifically, and he does have a master's degree. But
What kind of Protestant is he? Is he
he's a
non-denominational?
non-denominational pastor.
What's his church like? How big is it?
Well, he doesn't have a church right now, so
No.
he's in the process of moving too. So, but yeah, he doesn't do it for a career. He just has his ordination and everything. So we have a lot of. I think it helps me with my apologetics kind of practice to kind of discuss different aspects of the faith, and like, okay, so what are your thoughts on like justification or whatnot, and
What's his number
so.
one problem with the Catholic Church?
Well,
Problem with
he
being the
has
truth.
he has subscribed to the belief of a lot of them that there are historical facts that are untrue that the Catholic Church has suppressed.
Like what?
Well, the most recent one that he told me about was it the Gospel of Thomas, and
Oh,
so I was like, okay, well here, uh, let's look at it from a historical perspective, and then let's put it into context, and why was why was this gospel not used? Let's not look at the contents of the gospel itself first. Let's look at the historical aspects, and then let's take it in a context perspective, because I think that's what a lot of churches don't do when they make those arguments there.
Well, I would say the large majority of Protestants are so woefully ignorant on history, especially the early history of the church. This is why they have these honestly asinine ideas that Constantine created the church. But the Gospel of Thomas is another one. If you look at the canon of Scripture, all those epistles and Gospels were written, between 55 to 95 AD, and the Gospel of Thomas was written at least 100 years later. Not written by Thomas, because clearly Thomas was already martyred in India. And it doesn't line up with the canon. We had a proto-canon very early on in the church, and nowhere was the Gospel of Thomas, no matter what part of Christendom at the time, whether it be Ethiopia, Armenia, or the Mediterranean, was the Gospel of Thomas ever considered canonical. It was just never considered canonical, not to mention the Gnostic elements to it. But he's not going to hear anything that you bring up, right?
Well, sometimes he will. I just sent him a text, and he's like, "That's too long for me to read." So,
well, you know what? You could send him. I did an episode on the Gnostic Gospels on Gospel of Thomas, but how open is he to hearing your Catholic retorts?
It's good. There's eventually a point where he will say, I have my beliefs and you have yours, and we're never going to change each other's opinions on it. But he is willing to at least have that interesting dialogue.
So essentially, he doesn't believe the Catholic Church is the true church because we don't support the Gospel of Thomas. I mean, that's what.
Well, there's a lot of that's one aspect, but there's a lot of things in there that I haven't even fully approached with him yet. That we just
is he Bible alone, sola scriptura?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, that stuff is the easiest stuff to dismiss. Sola scriptura is easy. All you got to tell Protestants is show me in the New Testament where it says that the handbook for Christian living is the Bible. Just do that. The Bible itself invalidates sola scriptura.
Yeah. So I was when I came back to the church a few years ago, I started listening to John Martinoni on EWTN, because I still had that Novus Ordo. That was all I'd done. And a lot of those arguments I use.
Great. If you guys are not familiar, you guys who watch this later on, John Martignoni, he kind of has that hillbilly kind of accent. I love his website. I've never been to it, but it's like Christian something. So he's clever because he gives the name. It's not Catholic, and I think he lives in the Deep South, right? So he's surrounded by Protestants. So he does quick apologetics geared toward Protestantism, and he kind of has this Joel Osteen kind of voice to it. I guess that's he's been doing it for quite a long time. Right?
Yeah, so I'm going to plug him, I guess. The website is Bible Christian Society.
Bible Christian Society. It's a great name because Protestants be like, "Ooh, that sounds like a good name of a Protestant." And they go there and it's Catholic. What?
Yeah, and a lot of it, when I do my apologetics, work with just Protestants, because I understand a lot of them are sola scriptura. I take a lot of his hints on how to argue these points with them. So, with my friend.
You mentioned that he is Novus Ordo, but I think there's plenty of, and I think that is one of the successful fruits of the post-conciliar period is that we've had lay evangelization, whereas before the council was mostly done by the clergy. So I don't have a problem with EWTN. I mean, I can nitpick some things here and there, or Ascension Press, or any of these outlets, but Trent Horn and Martignoni and EWTN and all these guys, I think, are doing God's work because they are practicing apologetics and they are bringing people to the church. And EWTN, for whatever criticism we might have of it, does bring people to the faith and ultimately, know them by their fruit. So I don't have a problem with any of them being like Novus Ordo apologists.
Yeah. So I mean, and I'm, I am Novus Ordo. I lean more traditionalist. I don't see yet some of the problems that I've seen, other people that you've talked to. But that may just be a lack of knowledge, or that I'm still, learning things, about traditionalism versus Novus Ordo versus Vatican II, which is actually what I'm going to be diving into next, just to learn as much as I can about like the history of Vatican II, and because I came in post Vatican II, I was raised Novus Ordo. I never really saw any issues, especially that the people who are traditionalists or SSPX or whatever that they see with that, and so I'm like, wait, what is that? Why is that an issue? And kind of diving into the history there. So I'm still on my journey. I still have a lot to learn, and I hope to develop an opinion, and it may swing me more traditionalist, or maybe I'll be a voice somewhere in the middle,
All that
hoping to.
matters is that you're practicing your faith, you're receiving the sacraments. When you can, you're trying to stay to grace. And Christ says it 3 times: those who persevere to the end will be saved. So, I mean, ultimately, the thing is, like, there shouldn't be a spectrum. There really wasn't a spectrum 100 years ago, 500 years ago. We were all practicing Catholics or doing the best we can. And so you've kind of seen this political application of terms. Are you a liberal Catholic? Are you a moderate Catholic? Are you a Matthew 25 Catholic? Are you a conservative? No, there should be no adjectives. You're a Catholic or you're not. But we use these kind of political terms when we shouldn't. There's just, you are a practicing Catholic or you're not. That's why I have that video. There's no such thing as liberal Catholics.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
tell your friend, tell your Protestant friend, I'm more than, he's invited to come on if he wants to talk about and just have a little debate. And we can do like 3 minutes stopwatch so we don't talk over each other kind of stuff. Tell him he's more than welcome. And if he feels more comfortable, you can be on the live stream as well.
Okay, I will definitely do that. It might be a little while because he's moving to and getting set up in his new place and whatnot. So, but I will bring up the subject, and I think that would be an interesting, even if I'm not on there, it'd be something to view, interesting, something to watch. So,
any other Protestants that you have in your life that you interact with, or atheists?
Oh man, I don't interact much with people in general. Like, I'm just always working. So, I'm working, or I'm going to mass as much as possible on my days off, just because I got addicted to daily mass at one point, and then I had to work again.
Daily mass is great. The few times in my life where I've worked right next to, like in downtown, next to the cathedral, and I was able to go to daily mass, is beautiful. So if you can go to daily mass, I mean, I'd say like every day, but the more you can go to mass, it just keeps you in a better state of grace. And I just found my life to always be the most fulfilling and Christ-centered when I was receiving, not just, even if I wasn't in a state of grace, but just by receiving the graces that came from going to mass. I would tell you, just, try to go to daily mass at least a couple of times a week. Definitely. All right. So let's talk about, because we do talk a little church politics here. Are you a sedevacanist? You're not a sedevacanist because clearly you got to know this order.
Definitely not.
What is your impression of the SETIs, or do you? And we can talk about YouTube content, because when it comes to the SETIs, I mean, it's essentially YouTube outlets that kind of push the SETIs. Do you know of any SETI YouTube content, or how do you even know about them?
Not personally, mostly just, in dealing with like traditionalists, like Facebook groups or, whatnot, or most of my in-person discussions with the traditionalist movement is through FSSP, which they aren't sedevacantists. So for me, it was just a cautionary tale when I was young, like, hey, as soon as we start straying from this aspect, or believing the Pope isn't the Pope, raising the true Pope, that's when we start to have a problem, in terms of being the one true church. So there was that cautionary tale when I was younger. Now it's just kind of meeting people through media, I guess, or through like YouTube or Facebook or whatever. What is my opinion?
Do you encounter sedevacanists on these Facebook groups?
Sometimes I'll, they'll talk about, how Novus Ordo is an apostasy, and they'll talk about how the Pope, look at what the Pope is doing. He's not the Pope, and sometimes you'll run across the people who believe fully that St. Pius was the last Pope, the last true pope, and you come across them. Still have little experience. I'm wary of discussions with them because sometimes, I do
There
feel.
are no discussions with them. They tend to steamroll, and they have this kind of pridefulness. I mean, to be that's my opinion. The set of mechanics. I if you've watched any of these other live streams, I'm sympathetic to some of the stuff that they say, and I can understand their argument. But ultimately, I feel like they're no different than the radical left in that they both sides suffer from this sin of pridefulness. And I'm on these Facebook groups too, where I see the church is an apostasy, da 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 da, and I'm like, okay, well, it's the same. Like the video I have, the two easiest retorts for Catholics. One, encountering Protestants is just show me and prove it. Just say there's two things. We worship Mary. Okay, show me in the catechism where it says you worship Mary. No, show me or prove it, right? Constantine created the church. Okay, prove it, But it's the same thing with the set of canons. Prove it, prove it. You can't prove it. And it to me, it's the sin of arrogance that some dude in some basement in Paducah, Kentucky can tell me that the church, for sure, absolute guarantee, is in apostasy. Nobody knows that for sure. Nobody in America can say with 100% absolute certitude that the church is an apostasy and or that we haven't had a valid pope since 1958. Now, you can have theories. Of course, we've heard Francis say things that are like probably heretical. Yes. But to make that extrapolation that, yes, the church is and I know the truth. None of you know the truth. I know the truth. It's like what Father Ripperger says is the sin of singularity, right? I know, I have the red pill. You are all blue pill sheeple. And it's this sin of like, I need to know the truth. Like I'm like Neo, for example, right? I'm Neo. And you guys don't know crap. And it's like, it just drives me crazy.
Well, the way you bring that up, I think of, the idea that happened to the Protestants is that you don't need a church to know what the Holy Spirit is saying to you, and that's why there's so many denominations. I feel like that may be an aspect of that is I know for sure that this is the right thing. In terms of that, it's like, well, how do you know that? What is
Luther would
telling?
always say, I'm following my conscience. I'm following my conscience.
Yeah.
Well, your conscience was not properly formed, so it doesn't really matter if you're following your conscience at all. But certainly, I mean, we've seen with Protestantism how as soon as Luther left, and he and Zwingli had a falling out because they had a falling out, let's say, on the real presence. Luther still believed in the real presence, Zwingli didn't, so they had a falling out. Luther essentially excommunicated Zwingli and said that he is damned. And so you saw immediately in the 1520s, this schisming and the breaking away already started.
Yeah. And I would venture to, go so far to say is even, from the original Reformation, if Luther looked at the church that he formed today, he would be like, what, totally different. And seeing all the offshoots of that, there's 1,000 denominations in the Protestant church,
Oh, yeah. Luther was a megalomaniac. He believed in his own hermeneutic and he expected you to follow it. And if you didn't, he would denounce you. It wasn't like, and I've mentioned this before, like he and Calvin weren't like, hey, just read a Bible as a group and whatever you come up with it as your divine revelation is cool. No, look, Calvin ran Geneva like a dictator. And if you didn't agree with him, he'd kick you out or have you killed, like Michael Servetus, for example. They wanted you to follow their belief, their humanistic. This is how you interpret the Bible. This is the new rubric we're going to use. And if you don't like it, then you're anathema and so forth. So you're totally right. And look at Luther. I mean, do you think Luther would support open lesbian clergy in the Lutheran Church? Probably not.
Yeah,
I mean,
no.
even though Luther had some issues on the social side personally, I don't think he'd be supportive of that. So no doubt, like he would have been like, what's going on? I'm like, well, you started all this. You opened the Pandora's box.
Yeah, I think what's going on now with you said it yourself, opening Pandora's box with all these crazy beliefs that are happening in the Christian church in general. Yeah, I definitely see that, especially with the, I've watched a couple pastors who are trying to promote, the homosexuality question, in terms of,
Oh, that's what the synod
reading
synodality
something,
is really all about. If you've
you
ever
know.
been to any of the synod or synodality meetings, it's essentially middle-aged women complaining, why don't we have female priests and why don't we normalize
Mhm,
homosexual unions? That's pretty much it. If you've ever got to those. So yeah, there's definitely an agenda that's being played out in certain
mhm.
elements of it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, definitely. I missed that comment. That
Oh, let me
just
put it back
popped
up
up.
here.
Yeah, and so I do agree that to that. And like, especially with our current pope, I'll see stuff that he says and I'm just like, whoa, and it makes me stop and think for a second. But the approach I generally take is this an ex cathedra statement that he's saying this in, or is this a personal opinion? Because they are allowed to have personal opinions, and sometimes those personal opinions are wrong. You know, uh,
For sure. I mean, the church has always, going back to the apostles, have had wicked people, corrupt people, venal people, and it's no different today. I mean, you could argue that we probably have a higher percentage of change agent, fifth column, crypto, socialists, Freemasons in the curia right now, and it's a bad time in the church. But even more reason that why we need to step up, because this is the time of making saints. We are in a perilous time on every level politically in America and certainly in the church. And this is the time that we need to step up. So
mhm,
one of the reasons I get frustrated with the kind of the apocalyptic Catholic YouTube content, I don't know if you listen to that live stream where Steve and I talked about different YouTube content creators, is that I think that a lot of them just stir people up into this hysteria, into this kind of nihilistic view, like, oh, Francis did this, Securia did this, it's all negativity. And it's like, okay, but I don't care. Like, I don't know how many posts or YouTube channels that I've seen pop up on my recommended. Francis likely going to resign this week. I've been hearing that for a year. That's all clickbait. That's all clickbait because
yeah,
it's just like, well, until he resigns, why do I care? I don't
yeah,
care.
yeah.
Honestly, I don't care if Francis is an evil man. And this is what bothers me, and I might have a minority view on this. I get so frustrated with what I call like the apocalyptic Catholic YouTube content, where it's all doomsday stuff. It's all negative stuff. When ultimately all you should be working on is your salvation, work on your prayer life, work on your works of mercy. And these content creators, and this is why I like a channel like Sensus Fidelis, because they will have episodes on the saints. They will have episodes on how to improve your faith. And I just get so frustrated with the political YouTube, Catholic political stuff. And I don't need any. We could name names if you
Mhm,
want to name names, but I don't think they lead you towards sanctity. I don't think they improve you as a Catholic. All it does is stir up anxiety and fear mongering. And to me, honestly, there's a level of arrogance that these people have, because it goes back to, Francis is a heretic. Vigano said this. It's like, so what? So
I
what?
I think my problem with, I would suppose, the apocalyptic side is it potentially stirs up what I would call superstitious belief, or opinion in people who without that kind of catalyst, maybe wouldn't be thinking along that line. And the way I look at it is, am I right? If I were to die today, you know what what do I think would happen? And if I think I'm not in a state of grace, then what do I need to do to get myself there?
Right.
So I mean, because who knows what's going to happen? I don't know whatever what this mystic says was going to happen. I don't know if that's going to
Who cares what
happen
that mystic says? It's
now.
private revelation. We don't need to believe it.
I'm not worried about that because I could die tomorrow. You know,
Exactly.
so I
Right.
just want to make sure that I'm where I need to be at, in terms of the state of my soul every single day. And if I'm not there, I'm always pushing to be there. And I think that's what most people should be worried about.
You certainly see it in the Protestant world that the whole end times worry, and I just don't get it. It's like, people have been predicting the end times forever. Christ even says he doesn't know the day or the hour. Now, whether that's hyperbole or not doesn't really matter, but 99.9% of the time, everybody who worried about end times died before the end times came, right?
Yeah.
Like, why worry about the end times? And even in the Catholic world, you get the 3 days of darkness, end time stuff. It's just like, why are you worrying about this?
And I when I was being formed, I had some mentors who were really into that stuff. So I was like, oh, have you heard about this? And, and I just kind of, at a certain point, I kind of had to realize, that may happen in my lifetime. It may never happen. It may happen someday, generations in the future. And I need not to be worried about it as long as I am in a state of grace, or I'm approaching that state of grace. Always, it's a continuing battle until I'm not able to, until I'm not in the church militant anymore. And then I can't battle anymore. But
look, if the end times were
so
to
that's
come
my
today,
perspective.
I would be frustrated and sad, but ultimately I'd be like, why am I going to stress over something I can't control? So then I can tell, hey, Christ, can we not have the end times right now? I don't want to deal with tribulation. So it happens, it happens. And going back to kind of the evil that's in some of the curia, it's like, it goes to the parable of the wheat and the weeds, where Christ or Peter says, the wheats grow with the weeds. Let's cut out the weeds. And he's like, well, if you cut out the weeds, you might hurt the wheat. So let them grow fully. And then at the end, we'll harvest both and burn the weeds. And it's the same thing. Like, the papal office is a divine office. It was created by Jesus on the rock of Peter. So the office is I would say impeccable. It's unblemished. But certainly we've had bad popes and we've had bad curia, and there's in the two are not mutually exclusive. Like, you hear Protestants always say this, well, the popes had lovers, so what? That doesn't undermine the magisterial teaching, the dogma of the faith. The office is a divine office, but we're all fallen because we all have the sin of Adam and Eve. And I'll tell them, it's like, okay, we'll find an institution that hasn't been corrupted. Every institution has been corrupted. And if you judge every institution for one bad person, then you would not even be in a house. You wouldn't be on a highway. You wouldn't certainly go to the hospital. So it's like this specious logic. But there's evil people in the curia. Absolutely, there's change agents in the curia that are trying to destroy the church.
So
what can I do about it? I can't do anything about it, so I'm not going to worry about it.
So I grew up during, and I converted around the time of the abuse scandal was big in the news, and I always received the argument, why would you be part of this church if that's happening? And my argument was always, why would you leave if you know the teachings? If you know the teachings are true, why would you leave because there are bad people? Because the church is full of sinners. It's for sinners.
Right.
It's not for the righteous. It's for
a hospital
sinners.
of sinners, not a museum of saints.
Yeah. And so that was always my argument. And if you want to improve the church, I think you should improve it within, not leave it.
Right.
So, if this is a problem for you,
but ultimately these
go
people,
more priests.
Right. We got to get better priests and actually come back to your parish and actually try to improve the parish. But ultimately what these people are doing is just an act of rebellion, right? What they're saying, they use these as smokescreen arguments as to why they want to live a libidinous, hedonistic life, or why they jump to a Protestant church, because Protestantism is lazy Christianity, because the theology in itself lends to laziness and complacency. Once saved, always saved. Oh, so I can fornicate, I can be a drunkard, I can divorce and remarry, I'm saved no matter what. So that in its theology makes it lazy Christianity in itself. You don't have to do works of mercy and so forth. So most of the people who use those arguments, like I leave the church because of church scandal, really what it is just it's the act of rebellion. It's the act of, I'm my own God, I'm my own Pope, I want to do what I want. So they'll put all these arguments in front of it, but ultimately that's what it boils down to.
hmm Definitely agree with you on that point.
Let's look at Camo Vet is the one guy posting here out of the 5. Later on,
Yeah,
there's
I saw him
always
do a couple.
people who watch this later on. But hey, you never know. In 5 years, it could be 300 people who watch this. Let's go through here. Can a pope have a personal opinion on basic morality that goes against? Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, throughout history, you've had popes that, let's say, the Borgia Pope, Alexander VI. He was in concubinage. You know, he had lovers. He had illegitimate children. So he can express his personal opinions on church teaching, but as long as he doesn't teach it ex cathedra, you know, he can believe whatever he wants to believe. Does he see Protestants using the current hierarchy of morality as an argument against the church? How can you say that the teaches so when your own hierarchy doesn't believe it? Yeah, okay. What the Protestant church that they belong to is not impeccable. I mean, there's immorality over there as well.
I mean, what I see a lot of, and it's because I think it's more visible in Catholicism, because Catholicism is thought of, especially in media, as odd or weird, especially when it comes to the priesthood. Like when I was growing up, you know, you had the whole abuse thing going on, but it was only brought to the attention when it was priests. And I see it happens just as often in the Protestant church. And there was just I believe it was a news article about, you know, one specific occasion where that happened, but it's never talked about when it's a Protestant, you know. And so they will use those extreme type of egregious, sickening things as an argument point, definitely, and especially when it comes to the hierarchy. You know, look who you're following. You know,
we are definitely too much in this world, or of this world instead of in this world, because even like Bill Donahue of the Catholic League wrote this great book recently on the sex abuse scandal, and he talked about what a lot of people already knew, that it was a homosexual problem, that the clergy has been overrun by homosexuals. I mean, certain estimates, it's up to 80%. And so if you look at the sex abuse scandal, it was pederasty, it was grooming, it was homosexual priests grooming 12, 13, 14-year-old boys. But if you bring that up to any Catholic, Novus Ordo Catholic, any fallen away Christian, any atheist, you're going to be accused of homophobia. You hate the homosexuals, right? And that's how much Kool-Aid, secular Kool-Aid, all Christians have drank, because the people want to believe, well, you know, the media, of course, is very anti-Catholic. So of course, like they're going to like salivate when they hear about these sex scandals. But you tell them, you know, it's something like 20 times worse in public schools, daycare workers, social workers, the sex abuse scandal. They'll just say, shut up. That's not true, right? Because they want to take down the church, because the left has been wanting to take down the church forever. So if you just commonly say, oh, it's only 0.3% of all priests have ever been proved of sex abuse scandals, and it's much higher in public institutions, you know, shut up. Actually, it's a homosexual problem. If we purge the clergy of the homosexuals, open homosexuals, then this would go away. Shut up, right? You're a homophobe. So that's how deep we are in secularism, when we could just bring up these truths and people are going to accuse us of hate speech.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to, especially with those, and I've run into those, you know, kind of where you have a cudgel argument to just shut someone up, and you know, at that point in the argument, I feel as if I've won already, because I've gotten them to not respond intelligently. They're just trying to get me to be embarrassed or feel like I'm in the wrong, you know, because I'm a hater or whatever.
That's a cultural Marxist tool. I mean, to name call, like if you didn't like Obama's policies, you're a racist, right? If you're against open borders because you don't think a country has a right to determine who comes into their borders, then you're anti-immigrant or you're an anti-Mexican or whatever it is, right? It's these name callings because it triggers and shuts down most people, because most people don't know how to respond. And it's the same thing here, what we talked about with the sex abuse scandal. And like you said, yes, I mean, all churches have issues. The Protestants, it's mostly going to be heterosexual issues, you know, the teen pastor, you know, hanging out with the teenage girls too much. But I mean, there's scandal everywhere because we're human, you know, and you don't leave Peter for Judas, you know, you don't leave the truth because there's scandal everywhere. But ultimately, when they don't hear these messages, you just, like I said, we talked about in the beginning, you bring it up, and then if they don't want to hear it, you shake the dust off the sandals and you move on because you've done your Christian duty.
Yep.
And and that's the kind of the goal of my channel, is just help people defend the faith. But ultimately, you can't proselytize and you can't just browbeat people all the time, because they'll just tune out. And ultimately, you just have to let go. Ultimately, their salvation or lack thereof is ultimately their choice. Christ gave us, or God gave us, intellect and will, and we choose to make these decisions regarding our future and our salvation.
Yeah, I mean, I approach those types of discussions and arguments, apologetics, with always approach it with charity, and as long as the person's willing to talk with me and just not try and beat their opinion into me, then I'm willing to have a discussion with them, even if I know I'm not going to convince them. Maybe sometime down the road, they'll eventually, at least be able to hear my arguments and think about them. But it's not necessarily I'm going to convert this person today. But if they're also not willing to listen, and they just want to accuse me or accuse my church of one thing or another, then obviously I'm not going to engage in that discussion because it's useless. I mean, the point of apologetics is defending your faith, and if they're not listening to the defense intelligently or rationally, then there really isn't a point at that period.
Like Scripture says in 1 Peter 3, be ready to make a defense of the faith. And I think all Catholics, to a certain extent, I mean, we can't all be Trent Horn, but at the same time, we do need to know a modicum of the faith to be able to defend it, because we are asked to defend it, and we're also asked to teach it to our children. So like apologetics and catechesis, I think, are two sides of the same coin, but they are different. All Catholics, just like how every American should be able to defend their house and know how to use basic survival skills and so forth, it's the same thing, especially in the secularist world, that all Catholics, and I would say all Christians in general too, especially because we all have one common enemy, which is atheism. And it frustrates me when the Protestants will nitpick and fight the Catholics all the time, because it's like, don't you understand? Our people, all of us, are getting poached by the same enemy, and that enemy is atheism, and behind atheism is Satan. It's Satan, and they can't see the forest from the trees. As I've talked about, it's like you don't see Catholics hating Protestants nearly as much as Protestants hating Catholics. And with all the different denominations, with their theology scattered everywhere, they have one thing in common: Catholic animosity, right? They can all unify around their dislike of Catholicism. Whereas most Catholics, like, we don't hate Protestants because there's too many denominations to keep track of, but the Protestants, a lot of them just hate Catholicism. And that's why it's like, I just want to tell them, it's like, dude, redirect your hatred to atheism.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that division. Yeah. So I think that catechesis is probably the biggest issue, in my personal opinion, is just having that lack of knowledge. And I know we've discussed this, but definitely I think there should be a more active catechesis in the church today, especially in the Novus Ordo Church, to where people, do their 2 years or whatever of CCD, when they're growing up, and that's it. And that's all they have. And then they grow up and they're like, okay, well, I don't need to learn anything more. And I think that's where we should start in terms of arguing our faith. Get that knowledge background, and I kind of lost my train of thought of where I was going with that. But anyways, yeah.
I've suggested that we have like some sort of catechetical academy in every parish. The problem with the catechesis is a lot of the parents are like, as soon as they're confirmed, we're out, right? Why do I want to come once a week to my kid to go to classes or even have Sunday school? And so you're right. I mean, how many parents would be like, after seventh grade or whatever 14-year-olds is, I'm not going to take my kids to middle school or high school. They wouldn't do that. But we have this view with Catholic catechesis is once you hit 14, you don't need to know more. And some RCI programs are very good. A lot of them are not that good. But the issue is like, how do you continue getting high schoolers and 20-somethings to come to the parish to learn more about their faith? That's the problem. Where you're going to offer like free donuts, that's not going to get the majority of the parishioners over there. And luckily, we do have Catholic Answers or EWTN or all these things, but that's only an asset to those who want to learn about the faith, right? Who want to increase their faith. But the large majority of Catholics, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the stats, the large majority don't believe in the real presence, the large majority contracept, And so how do you get to those people like your fallen away parents, right? How do you get to those people? Because those people aren't going to EWTN or Catholic Answers. And how do you get to those people? You, me, because we're the only ones in their life that can evangelize to them. And we are called. That's the Great Commission. That's the Great Commission. We are all called to evangelize.
I agree. What was the comment that we missed?
How do you guys handle going to family who marry outside the church or live with a partner without marrying? Well, I mean, depends how, are they Protestant? It depends if they read the Bible. I mean, there's a lot of approaches. You could just show them Matthew 19 and just say where Christ says those who remarry are fornicating. If they've already remarried civilly or in a church ceremony, it's a difficult situation because they would have to file for an annulment and live a Josephite wedding or marriage, I should say, until the annulment comes through. Most people don't have the will to do that. And it's a major problem to the point where the liberal Catholics, of course, are wanting the Pope to give some sort of blessing to and allow Catholics who've remarried illicitly to receive the Eucharist, which I think is a colossal mistake.
Yep.
But how do you evangelize to them? I mean, I would tell them, it really depends on the situation. Like if their first marriage, like Nicholas's, was civil, well, then that's not really going to be a problem because God doesn't recognize civil marriages. So they don't have to go through the annulment process. But I would just, if they were previously married and civilly divorced and remarried, I would just bring it up to them that you really need to have an annulment. And they'll say, well, like I can determine if my first marriage wasn't valid. It's like, no, because you can't adjudicate your own court case. You can't go to court and be the judge for your own murder case where you murdered somebody. No, there needs to be somebody who's objective who adjudicates whether or not that first marriage was valid. You can show them Matthew 19 about divorce and remarriage as being wrong. And even though they'll probably go to a Protestant church that will remarry them, that's the problem with Protestants, again, lazy Christianity, is that they'll find these Protestant churches that will remarry them when they shouldn't, because they'll have their own personal exegesis on Matthew 19. Oh, it's okay if the spouse cheated, or it's okay if they weren't nurturing you on some way. No, Christ is not a liar. Now, if they're fornicating, if they're just living like like cohabiting, I mean, it's a problem. And I would say this is a woman problem. And this is what the MGTOW movement would talk about is if women are giving the milk for free, there's no incentive for men to marry. And we live in the most promiscuous time of human history. And a lot of that falls on the women. Because if it was like it was for hundreds of years, that if you wanted to have sex, you had to get married, then a lot of men would not be cohabiting and fornicating. So a lot of this falls on the women who unfortunately are just, giving it away. And so men like the trappings of marriage without the responsibility of marriage. It's the path of least resistance, like water going down a river. And so, of course, men are going to gravitate toward that because it's an easier thing. So I think that falls on the women more than the man. But what do you think?
So first, I would want to know, where are they coming from in terms of their beliefs when it comes to marriage? Are they falling along the same lines as I am? Are they Catholic? Do they believe that marriage is a sacrament? Or what is their reasoning for wanting to get married or cohabitating or whatnot? I'm definitely going to explain my beliefs and why I believe them. I want to give them context for marriage, especially, and definitely biblical proof there. And it just depends on the situation. All situations are different. In my personal life, I don't recommend marriage just because I think that the civil aspect of it can be very disadvantageous for guys. But
that's why the whole MGTOW movement's around.
Yeah.
And this is why you have it's such a strong movement where if you guys aren't fair, that's men going their own way. It's kind of a belief that the court system and family law is so disadvantageous toward men that a lot of men are just opting out completely.
Yeah, but I also have those exceptions where, if you are Catholic and looking towards a sacramental marriage, I mean, there are a lot of roadblocks towards what would happen civilly in terms of getting a divorce, and whatnot, or remarrying is it keeps a lot of people together when otherwise they would just, oh, I'm tired of you, I don't love you anymore, or we married too soon, we're not right for each other, or so and so cheated, so I can just leave. Where you can't really do that, in the church, because there are consequences. You only have that one valid marriage, that one valid sacramental marriage in the church.
This goes back to the secular infiltration of the churches and in general, because it's now with marriage, it's like, well, marriage is for romanticism, whereas the original historical purpose of marriage is procreation and education of children. And you saw that with Castor Canubi with Pope Pius XI. And then in the more kind of modern post-conciliar view, it's you marry for love. And so if that's the overall main reason why you marry, then what happens when you no longer are in love with that person, you don't feel that pitter patter, then you're justified to leave. And since we live in a system, a world of no fault divorce since 1970, if you sneeze the wrong way, I can divorce you. And then typically, going back to MGTOW, men will lose a lot of their assets. They'll lose the kids. They'll have to pay child support and alimony on a decision that they chose not to do. And a lot of people don't know this, but 70% to 90% of divorces are initiated by women. And I think some of that is connected to the welfare state. If women didn't have the welfare state to fall back on, which is essentially the new husband and new father for them, and there wasn't no fault divorce, I think you would see the divorce issue abate a lot more and so forth. But yeah, that's a good answer. Jesus said, okay, so that's in the parable of the rich man asking what he can do. Jesus Christ never said it. You have to give away all of your possessions. He's using that as hyperbole in that parable. This hatred from Protestants, yeah. Well, yeah, it starts with the Reformation, for sure. It started with the Reformation. And the Reformation didn't have to happen. The church was in constant reform, going back to the Cluny reforms of the 12th century and Francis, St. Francis, St. Dominic. And it's okay that the church had its issues at the time, but that doesn't give justification to break away from the church and then invent false theology like sola scriptura, sola gratia, sola fide.
So in my experience from Protestantism, a lot of the hatred that I saw personally was on the Baptist side. And I think a lot of that stems from misunderstanding of a lot of teachings of the church. Maybe, someone was told something by their old school Baptist grandma who's like, Catholics do this and Catholics do that. And a lot of that was quelled in my personal life just by discussing each of those points that they had. So I think a lot of it is just misunderstanding of what we believe and what we teach. And
I think C.K. Chesterton is the one. I can't remember who was the one, guys. It's like a lot of Protestants hate Catholics for not for what they believe, for what they actually think that the church teaches. Yeah. And so
that's what I see.
If you go one by one on the teachings, like we worship statues, clearly we don't worship statues. The Catholic Church has never worshipped statues, but a lot of Protestants grow up in this milieu where they're taught through like Jack Schick leaflets or whatever that the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon. And a lot of them even believe that Catholics aren't even Christians, which is mind-blowing because we were the only Christians for the first 1,000 years until the Orthodox schism. So it's just mind-blowing. But then you have to kind of remember that they grow up in this cocoon of believing Catholic falsities. And so then to me, you go to the question of invincible ignorance. How, Nicholas, do you think we can still have invincible ignorance in the age of the internet, like these Baptists or Protestants who hate the church, when they can just Google, hey, does the Catholic Church really worship statues? They can look it up. They can look it up. They choose not to look it up. So, how much ignorance can they have?
So, I think you can, just because of the way the media is, and anyone can put out something there, and you might get to the wrong person who's putting out the wrong information still. I think that if someone genuinely wants to know and wants to understand what the church teaches for just understanding as opposed to, just disproving someone, and trying to convert them, but understanding why they believe what they believe. I think that some people can, learn that we don't teach these things. But some people, even in the age of media, they're gonna, even if they want to understand, they can go to the wrong place. And with Google, with
But they
whatever.
choose to go to the wrong place because they could go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. They could go to a Catholic source. So they're going to go to Protestant sources for confirmation bias, right? But they could
Again,
go.
I think if someone's really dedicated to understand what we teach, then yes, they will go to those right sources. And sometimes they're just not going to understand, like, what's the catechism? If you're never associated with the church, and you're like, what the heck is a catechism? So I think that some of it stems down to just not understanding the things. And I think they would have to talk to someone who has a basic understanding of, hey, if you really want to know what the church teaches, go to this source. And they would need to know someone in the church, which a lot of these people, they're insulated, so they don't have that. I'm sure they could if they just reached out and talked to some random Catholic, I guess, on the side of the street. But some of them, yeah, I think that in your terms, invincible ignorance can still happen, even with that, just because of that insulation factor.
Well, I mean, there's certainly a lot of apologists who do believe that. So Mormons have a lot of great ideas. They have a family day. Yeah, that's true. I used to date way back a Mormon, so I'm pretty familiar with their world. And look, I totally agree. They keep their kids insulated. A lot of them will go to like a Mormon school very early in the morning, like at 6 a.m. before they go to public schools. And they do a good job of kind of keeping that family cohesion and teaching the kids the faith. I mean, the Mormon faith is going through a lot of problems right now because they're dealing with a lot of the cultural issues, just like we are and the Orthodox are as well. I think it's funny how a lot of trad cats will go Orthodox because they're like, over there, they don't deal with the LGBTQ issues or the transgender issues or female ordination. Like, no, the Orthodox have the same problem. But the Mormons, they're having that same problem, and they're losing a lot of their teenagers now with the age of the internet. And a lot of the Mormons are falling away as they get into their late teens, early 20s, to the point where they're moving up the missionary age to 18 because they realize that they are losing a lot of the Mormon kids, just like sadly in the Catholic Church too. There's the last that I saw was, your kid has a 12% chance of being a practicing Catholic if he or she goes to a Catholic school. Catholic school. 6% of public. So that's the Mormon one.
Yeah. I mean, so with Mormons, and I went to a church before I became a Catholic first, so I was still possibly preteen, early teen years, and the problems that I saw were maybe because I had attended other churches before and I wasn't just strictly like raised Mormon and in a Mormon family, but I saw a lot of hypocrisy when I actually just sat there and read the Book of Mormon versus just the Bible, and so that's what ultimately led me to go, okay, I've had enough of this one, and it's time to go on to something else. But a lot of those, they don't get that, so they have a lot of insular arguments for why this is true and why this says this, and and then nowadays I think a lot of what helps the youngsters is that rational side too, to where they've had a lot of their arguments disproven by just science,
history, archaeology,
science.
Yeah.
So well, if these claims aren't true, then and they're equal to these claims, so these claims are potentially not true. So, I'm going to do the research.
And I think like the Mormon way is a way that, they keep their group very insulated. And I mean, my ex left the Mormon faith. And when you leave the Mormon faith, I mean, the Mormon community, especially in small towns, they can turn against you. You lose a lot of your business connections. It's a major thing to go against the hive, kind of like the way the Jews used to be and the Catholics used to be, probably early American history.
So this is why I would argue that Mormonism is a cult, in that specific aspect of just shunning former members as opposed to talking with them with charity in your heart, about why they're doing what they're doing. If you think what they're doing is wrong, just shunning them completely is definitely, I think, not a good approach.
Certainly, I think I do agree with you that they have a much more likely being called a cult because they also have a leader who still has private revelation, and the private revelation is essentially considered dogma. Where, like, a lot of people say the Catholic Church is a cult, and I have an episode retorting that. We have none of the categories of what is classified as a cult. We're not small. We don't have a public ministry. We don't have a super charismatic leader. Certainly the Mormons.
And I think a lot of the arguments as far as Catholicism is a cult, it's just people don't understand what a cult is. They just see Catholicism as odd or weird, and that's because, especially in America, I mean, it's generally a Protestant evangelical, background. So then they see Catholics is just weird, and to them that's cultish, and they just don't understand what. And I would ask them, what is your definition of a cult? What do you think a cult is? And then I'd break down the different signs of the cult and say, do we do this? No. Do we do this? No. Do we do this? No. We're
but they choose. But see, the thing, Nicholas, is they choose to believe that they make a choice to cast these aspersions on the church, partly because they have to justify the existence of their own denomination, and it's hard. A lot, I know converts. It's hard when they realize that my whole life, like my ex, who was Mormon, when she realized that the backstory of Joseph Smith and all these things, I felt at the time, well, I could get her from Mormonism to Catholicism. And what I didn't realize out of my own hubris is most Mormons become atheists because they can't separate that Joseph Smith was a fraud, but that Christianity is not a fraud. They just throw everything out, and I didn't get it at the time. And so a lot of them, when they leave the faith, they become atheists completely, which is unfortunate. But I can kind of understand their worldview because they're right. In retrospect, they were raised in the cult. They see that, and they're like, well, then all of Christianity is fraudulent, and it's hard to kind of convince them that it's not the truth.
Well, yeah, I think when you don't have that rational side, when you've been insulated so much to believe that this is right and this is right and this is right, and that's all you've had your whole life, and then come to find out you learn all these things that completely disrupt that worldview, everything is wrong now to you.
Yeah.
So I definitely see why they would do that. It's difficult especially when evangelizing to Mormons or ex-Mormons in that situation.
Hey, so going back to the Mormons, I mean, I think the large majority of them are good people, and they do believe in a nuclear family, and they're one of the few, if not the only, other kind of hierarchical church that are social conservatives. They do believe in abortion in the case of rape and incest, but they agree with the Catholics in terms of most of the other social teachings. So I want to give credit to them. The theology is wacky beyond wacky. We don't have to spend time on their polytheistic views, but I want to give the Mormon people, I think there's so many things that they're doing right that we as Catholics could learn from.
Yeah, and I feel that way about a lot of faiths. Like you can completely disagree with the theology about another faith, but there are good aspects in their church. One of the things I think about, like just with Protestants in general, is their knowledge of Scripture. And I wish I had the brain sometimes and the memory to be able to just pull up this Scripture in defense of my argument. And sometimes they use it in wrong ways, but I think there are a lot of aspects that you can pull from other faiths without taking the theological views.
For sure. I think we have the fullness of the faith, no doubt. We have the fullness of the faith. And they have elements of the faith, but all the elements that they have are true or because of the Catholic Church. Like, for example, the Bible canon. I don't necessarily agree with you because I think the Protestants' grasp of the Bible and be able to memorize it has led them to the problem of denominationalism, because they will read and exegete scripture to a certain way, and there's no magisterium, there's nothing that's keeping them tethered to apostolic tradition. And so this is why they'll read something and misinterpret it and then eventually lead to chaos. And this is one of the reasons why the church early on was not overly supportive of Catholics reading the Bible, because they were worried of what was going on here. So I would agree. I think it's good if Catholics would read the Bible more, so long as they're tethered to the magisterium. If they're not tethered to the magisterium, you're in trouble.
So yeah, definitely, I agree with that point. In terms of interpreting scripture, you definitely have to look at, okay, what does the church teach about this specific, this specific scripture, or whatever. Yes, that aspect is good. I just wish I could be able to pull up something when I'm, perhaps in a discussion with someone, when they pull up, oh, hey, look at this. And I have to go in and it, maybe spend an hour or two, looking at a specific chapter in the Bible. And I want to look at, what the situation was, what's the context of this. So that way, then I can argue it. I can't just argue it on the spot sometimes.
Well, I would say this, look, so when a Protestant says, show me where in the Bible the Catholic Church teaches this, I don't even go down that road, because the argument in itself is wrong, because you're like going into enemy territory by trying to find scriptural proofs for Catholic teaching when we don't need scriptural proofs for Catholic teaching. I think it's a much better approach to invalidate their idea that it must be in the Bible in the first place. Because once you start justifying finding scripture, then you're playing their game, and their game is false.
I think that there are different situations where that approach is necessary, and different situations where I would want to use the Bible, just to meet them where they are. Because I don't think there's anything in Catholicism that is anti-biblical. It just comes down to, what are you taking from this? And what does the church teach? And I think it's a lot more productive on my side when I'm meeting them. I'm starting with the Bible.
Incrementalism.
And then, I'm talking to them about the history of the Bible as well, and I'm asking them, did the church exist prior to this? And, who canonized these books? Like what, for what reason do we have these books together? In the New Testament, why are they there? And I'm slowly bringing them to the realization that not everything that the church teaches is in the Bible, but it is all biblical.
Well said. Let's look at the last comment here. Invincible ignorance does not save a person. This is a huge heresy. Well, look, Thomas Aquinas talked about invincible ignorance. If there is a Sherpa in Nepal in the 12th century who there's no way they could have access to Jesus Christ, God's not going to punish that Sherpa for that. So that is legitimate invincible ignorance. What I'm talking about is can a Protestant or an atheist in America or in the West today with the internet have invincible ignorance? And maybe that's what what Camovets is talking about in that regard. But historically, there is invincible ignorance. Thomas Aquinas has talked about it in that regard. Nicholas, let's finish this up because we've already been talking an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Appreciate you coming on. You had mentioned to me that you do have a YouTube channel. Do you want to plug that?
So I just started my YouTube channel. It's Catholic Catechesis. It's a working name for now, but I'm still trying to figure it out and also manage my time effectively.
You have videos already there?
I can post just an introductory video right now. I've been working too hard this week, but yep. So basically, it's just a journey of me learning more about my faith, and potentially going on that journey with other people to where I can learn or possibly teach. For me, it's just a kind of a charitable journey, I guess. And also along the way, I hope to gain the knowledge that I need in defense of my faith when arguing these types of arguments with people who are anti-Catholic or possibly just misunderstand us.
And that's the beauty of these little apostolates. Is like, I think the mindset can't be I want to have make a lot of money from it. I think it's kind of the mindset of this is my way of giving back to Christ, and we have this knowledge and we should share it to others because Christ expects us to contribute and share on whatever our strengths are. Certainly, not everybody is into apologetics and catechesis. And if it's somebody who wants to give back by helping at the nursery during Sunday Mass, or helping the homeless, we're all called to do works of mercy. And it's kind of like, find the one that works for you. Some people, like the cloistered nuns, will pray for the dead. That's what they'll do all day, is just pray for us, pray for the dead. But we're all called to do some sort of apostolate. So I think it's great that this is your vocation, and may God bless it, that it do well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to plug that. Hopefully I'll get some more videos on this week.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Nicholas, take care. God bless, and enjoy Idaho.
I will, as long as I'm in it. All right. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. See you later. Well, we appreciate Nicholas for coming on the channel today and doing a live stream here. So for you guys who watch it later on, please post in the comments. And as always, check out the back catalog. There's probably about 300 episodes now on apologetics and so forth in Catholic living. And enjoy your weekend.